The silver ships hung in space like broken glass, their once beautiful hulls scarred by burns and holes. Inside the largest vessel, Council Leader Vexali stared at the holographic display showing what remained of his civilization, 12 worlds. Gone. Just empty husks of metal and wire where billions of his people once lived. "Show me Kepler 7 again," he whispered to his aide. The display shifted to show their former trade hub, where sprawling crystal cities once stretched across 3 continents. Now only gray metal covered the surface. The Devourers had taken everything. Every building, every tree, every grain of sand had been consumed and rebuilt into more of themselves. "Sir, the refugees from Titan Station have arrived," announced Commander Zektar from the bridge. "They bring ... disturbing news." Bexley closed his eyes. "More bad news. There's always more bad news these days. Send them in." The survivors who entered, his chamber looked broken. Their blue skin had turned pale, and their large eyes held the hollow stare of those who had seen the impossible. Captain Nellera, once proud commander of Titan Station's defense fleet, could barely stand. "They learned," she said without greeting. "The Devourers learned from our plasma cannons. By the 3rd wave, they had adapted. Our weapons did nothing. Nothing at all." "What about the Krex battle formations? The ethereal mind shields?" Nellera laughed, but there was no humor in it. "The Krex threw everything at them. Their best warriors, their strongest ships. The Devourers studied their tactics for 6 hours, then wiped them out in 20 minutes. The ethereals tried to attack their programming directly. Machines just absorbed their mental attacks and used them to become smarter." Vexali sank into his chair. The Krex were bred for war. They had conquered half the galaxy before joining the peaceful alliance. The ethereals could control matter with their minds. If they couldn't stop the Devourers, who could? "Sir," came a hesitant voice from the corner. Ambassador Cathara stepped forward, her young face filled with desperate hope. "There might be one option we haven't considered." The room fell silent. Everyone knew Cathara was brilliant, but she was also known for impossible ideas. The database lists a species from Sector 7G, planet designation, Earth. The inhabitants are called humans. Commander Zektar made a dismissive sound. "From a Class 12 death world, those primitives barely have spaceflight. What could they possibly do against the Devourers?" "That's exactly why they might succeed," Cathara said, pulling up Earth's data file. "Look at their world. Constant earthquakes, violent storms, temperature swings that would kill most of us, predators that hunt in packs, diseases that adapt faster than medicine can cure them." The hologram showed images that made everyone uncomfortable. Humans fighting each other with primitive weapons. Creatures with massive teeth chasing humans across open ground. Natural disasters that leveled entire cities. They'd fight each other constantly, Kethra continued. "Their military history is full of tactics that make no logical sense. They sacrifice entire armies to gain small advantages. They destroy their own resources rather than let enemies have them. They even fight to the death when retreat would be smarter."
House.
"You're describing barbarians," Vexley said.
House.
"Exactly. Barbarians who might be crazy enough to find a way to beat the Devourers." Some council members called the idea insane. Others pointed out that every logical approach had failed. In the end, it was the arrival of another refugee ship that decided the matter. The captain of the new ship brought word that the Devourers had reached the outer colonies of Zephyr Prime, their homeworld. They had maybe 10 days before their own planet would be under attack. "Send the message," Vexali ordered. "Contact Earth." 3 days later, the transmission reached Luna Station, a small human outpost orbiting Earth's moon. Captain Jake Morrison was reviewing supply reports when his communications officer, Lieutenant Dan Parker, called out, "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from outside the solar system. It's ... well, it's definitely not human." Morrison looked up from his desk. "Alien contact? You sure it's not some kind of test signal from Mars Command?" "No, sir. The signal pattern is completely unknown, and it's coming from the direction of the Centauri cluster." Translation software is working on it now. The message, when it finally came through, was desperate and broken. The translation was rough, but the meaning was clear. An alien civilization was dying. They needed help. They were offering technology, resources, anything humanity wanted in exchange for military assistance. Morrison read the message 3 times. First contact with aliens, and they were asking for help in a war. This was way above his pay grade. But the message had one detail that made him act immediately. The aliens said they had already lost 12 worlds and expected to be extinct within 2 weeks. Parker, get me a direct line to Admiral Thompson. At Earth's command. Priority Alpha. Sir, that will take 6 hours for the signal to reach Earth and get a response. Morrison looked at the alien message again. The desperation was clear, even through the poor translation. These beings were about to die, and they had somehow found Earth in their final moments. Send a response immediately. Tell them humanity accepts their request for military assistance. We'll send ships as soon as possible. Sir, shouldn't we wait for orders from Earth Command? Morrison thought about his daughter Sarah, safe in school on Earth. He thought about all the children on all the alien worlds that were about to be consumed by these devourers. Sometimes you have to do what's right, even if it's not what's safe. Send the message. Within hours, Morrison had authorized the deployment of the EU's Valor, one of humanity's newest exploration vessels. The ship wasn't military, but it was fast and could carry a full crew. Colonel Lisa Hayes, on leave from Mars Command, volunteered to lead the mission when she heard about the alien request. You realize this could be a trap, Morrison warned her as she prepared to depart. Hayes smiled grimly. Captain, I've read the intelligence reports from our deep space probes. There are signs of massive stellar engineering projects, space battles that wiped out entire star systems, and energy signatures we can't even understand. If there are aliens out there powerful enough to do all that, and they're desperate enough to call us for help, then we're already in more danger than we know. Chief Engineer Ben Carter loaded the Valor with every weapon humanity had developed. From nuclear missiles to experimental plasma cannons, Dr. Amy Foster, the mission xenobiologist, brought equipment to study alien life forms and technology. As the Valor prepared to depart Luna Station, Morrison received a priority message from Earth Command. Admiral Thompson was furious about the unauthorized response, but it was too late to recall the mission. Hayes, Morrison said over the comm, Earth Command is not happy about this. You're on your own out there, understood, Captain. If these aliens are telling the truth, we might be humanity's first line of defense anyway. Better to meet the threat out there than wait for it to come to us. The Valor activated its experimental hyperspace drive and disappeared in a flash of blue light, carrying humanity's first diplomatic mission into the unknown. None of them knew they were heading toward an enemy that had already defeated the galaxy's most advanced civilizations in the Zephyrian refugee fleet. Ambassador Kethra watched the incoming message with disbelief. The humans had agreed to help. They were actually coming. What have we done? Whispered Council Leader Vexali. We've called monsters to fight monsters. Kethra looked at the tactical display showing the Devourers consuming another world. Maybe that's exactly what we need. The EU's Valor dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Zephyrian territory, and Colonel Lisa Hayes immediately knew something was very wrong. Her sensors showed dozens of ships fleeing in panic, their crystalline hulls reflecting the light of a dying star system. My God, whispered Lieutenant Commander Rick Stone from the navigation station. Look at the size of those vessels. The alien ships were massive, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They moved with graceful precision, but Hayes could see damage on many of them. Scorch marks, missing sections, and what looked like bite marks taken out of their hulls. Colonel, we're being hailed, reported Communications Officer Janet Mills. The translation software is working, but the signal is pretty rough. Put it through. The voice that came through the speakers was melodic, but filled with desperation. Human vessel. This is Ambassador Cathara of the Zephyrian Coalition.
We
cannot believe you actually came. Please dock with our flagship immediately. Time is running out. Hayes studied the largest alien ship on her screen. It was beautiful, made of what looked like living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. It was also clearly damaged, with entire sections dark and lifeless. "Take us in, Stone, but keep our weapons ready." The docking process was awkward. Human and alien technology didn't match well, but the aliens had prepared an airlock that could handle the primitive human ship. When the doors finally opened, Hayes got her first look at an alien being. Ambassador Cathara was tall and thin, with blue skin that seemed to shimmer. Her eyes were twice the size of human eyes, and her movements were graceful in a way that made Hayes feel clumsy. But what struck Hayes most was the fear in those large eyes. "You came, Cathara," said in accented but clear English. "Your people actually came to help us. We said we would," Hayes replied simply. "Now tell us what we're fighting." Dr. Amy Foster stepped forward with her recording equipment. This was the moment she had dreamed of since childhood, first contact with an alien species. But the circumstances were far from what she had imagined. Cathara led them through corridors that seemed to be grown rather than built. The walls pulsed with organic light, and the air smelled like flowers after rain. Other aliens moved past them, all showing the same desperate fear. "Your ship is incredible," Foster said as they walked. "This technology is centuries ahead of ours." "That's what makes this so terrifying," Cathara replied. "Our technology is advanced. The Kreks have weapons that can crack planets. The Ethereals can manipulate matter with thought alone. The Devourers have defeated us all." They entered a large chamber where Council Leader Vexali waited with other alien officials. The holographic display in the center of the room showed a tactical map of local space, with red zones marking consumed worlds. "Humans," Vexali said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I apologize for our desperation, but you are our last hope. These Devourers, they are not like any enemy we have ever faced." Chief Engineer Ben Carter studied the display with professional interest. "Show us what we're dealing with." The hologram shifted to show detailed scans of the Devourers. They looked like mechanical insects the size of buildings, but made of liquid metal that constantly shifted and reformed. They moved in perfect coordination, millions of them working together like a single organism. "They consume everything," Cathara explained. "Metal, rock, organic matter, even the atmosphere. They break it all down to basic atoms and rebuild it into more of themselves. A single devourer can become 1,000 in just hours if it has enough material to consume." "But surely your weapons can destroy them," Hayes said. Vexali activated another display. "Watch this battle record from the Kreks homeworld." The humans watched in silence as the legendary Kreks warriors, bred for combat and equipped with devastating weapons, engaged the Devourer swarm. The first wave of attacks seemed effective, destroying hundreds of the mechanical creatures. Then something changed. They learned, Vexali said quietly. By the second wave, they had adapted their hull composition to resist Kreks weapons. By the third wave, they were using similar weapons against the Kreks. By the fourth wave, the Kreks were extinct. Foster felt sick to her stomach. How fast do they adapt? Faster than we can develop new strategies. The Ethereals tried to attack them mentally, assuming machines couldn't defend against psychic assault. The Devourers absorbed their attacks and learned to use mental manipulation against them. The Velthari tried biological weapons, thinking machines couldn't be infected. The Devourers adapted organic components and turned the diseases back on their creators. Hayes studied the tactical data with growing understanding. Every species had fought logically, using their greatest strengths. And every time, the Devourers had simply learned to counter those strengths and turn them into weaknesses. Colonel Carter said quietly, "These things have been fighting advanced civilizations for months. They've learned everything there is to know about high-tech warfare." "Then it's a good thing we're not a high-tech civilization," Hayes replied. The aliens looked confused by this statement. Cathara pulled up Earth's data file. "Your species shows promise, but your technology is quite primitive compared to ours. How do you expect to succeed where others have failed?" Hayes smiled grimly. "Because we don't fight fair." Before anyone could ask what she meant, alarms began blaring throughout the alien ship. Vexali rushed to a communication panel, his face going pale as he listened to the reports. "They've found us," he whispered. "The Devourers have detected our refugee fleet." The main display showed space around them, and Hayes saw something that would haunt her dreams. The stars were going out. One by one, the points of light were being blocked by something massive moving toward them. "Battle stations," Vexali ordered. "All ships prepare for emergency jump to hyperspace." "Wait," Hayes said. "Hey, let us see them in action first." "Colonel, this is not a simulation. If we stay, we die. Then we'll learn something useful before we run." The Zephyrian commanders looked at Hayes as if she was insane, but they held position. Within minutes, the Devourers came into visual range, and Hayes understood why the aliens were so terrified. There were millions of them, moving in perfect formation, like a living cloud of death. They flowed around asteroids, consuming them in seconds and adding their mass to the swarm. When they encountered a derelict alien ship, they covered it completely, and within minutes it was gone, replaced by more Devourers. "They're beautiful," Foster whispered, then looked shocked at her own words. "Beautiful and terrifying," Carter agreed. "Look at that coordination. No wasted motion, perfect efficiency." Hayes watched as a small group of Devourers approached a Zephyrian scout ship that had been damaged and couldn't escape. The creatures moved with liquid grace, covering the ship like mercury. She could see the alien crew through the viewports, screaming silently as their ship was consumed around them. "Jump to hyperspace now," Vexali ordered, as the fleet prepared to flee. Hayes noticed something that made her blood run cold. The Devourers weren't just consuming the ships randomly. They were analyzing them first, learning from each design. Before converting the materials, they were getting smarter with every victory. The refugee fleet escaped into hyperspace. But Hayes knew they were only delaying the inevitable. The Devourers would follow, and when they did, they would be ready for whatever defenses the aliens could prepare. Colonel Stone said quietly, "What are we going to do? Our weapons are centuries behind these people, and the Devourers just defeated civilizations that could crack planets." Hayes looked at the terrified aliens around her, then at her own crew. Carter was already sketching weapon modifications. Foster was studying the biological data on the Devourers. Stone was calculating hyperspace routes back to human space. "Going to do what humans do best," Hayes said. "Going to be unpredictable, stubborn, and probably insane. Hopefully that will be enough." Cathara overheard this and approached Hayes. "Your species really believes you can defeat an enemy that has conquered half the galaxy." Hayes met the alien's large eyes with her own steady gaze. "Ambassador, my species survived ice ages, plagues, and wars that should have wiped us out. We learn to fight in environments that kill most life forms, and we never, ever give up, even when giving up makes sense." "That sounds less like a plan and more like stubbornness." "Sometimes," Hayes said, "they're the same thing." As the refugee fleet jumped through hyperspace toward what might be their final battle, Hayes began to understand what they were really facing. The Devourers weren't just machines, they were the perfect enemy, designed to learn and adapt to any logical strategy. Good thing humans weren't always logical. The human fleet arrived like a pack of wild animals entering a formal dinner party. Where the alien ships were graceful curves of crystal and light, the human vessels were angular blocks of metal and weapons. The flagship UES Defiance looked like it had been built to ram through planets, and Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded it like she was planning to do exactly that. "Ambassador," Cathara watched from the observation deck of the Zephyrian flagship as 20 human ships took position. Around the refugee fleet, each human vessel was tiny compared to alien ships, but they bristled with weapons that looked primitive and dangerous. "Admiral Sullivan is requesting permission to come aboard," reported the communications officer. "Granted immediately," Council Leader Vexali replied. He needed to see these humans, who claimed they could defeat an enemy that had destroyed civilizations. "Admiral." Sullivan was shorter than most aliens, with gray hair and scars on her hands that suggested a lifetime of hard work. She moved with the confident stride of someone who had fought real battles, not just commanded from safety. Behind her came Colonel Ryan Torres, a man whose calm eyes seemed to see everything at once. Council Leader Vexali Sullivan said, offering a simple handshake instead of the complex greeting rituals aliens expected. I've reviewed the tactical data your people provided. This enemy is impressive, but not impossible. Admiral, they have defeated species far more advanced than humanity, Kethera said carefully. The Kreks had weapons that could destroy stars. That's exactly why they lost, Torres replied. They fought like they expected to win. They used their best weapons in predictable patterns. The Devourers learned to counter those patterns and turned their strengths against them. Dr. Amy Foster had spent the journey to Zephyrian space studying every piece of data about the mechanical swarm. Admiral, I think I understand why previous tactics failed. Every species fought efficiently. They minimized casualties, preserved resources, and retreated when victory seemed impossible. Exactly, Sullivan said with a grim smile. But humans don't fight efficiently. We fight to win, no matter what it costs. The aliens exchanged worried glances. These humans spoke of war like it was something they enjoyed. Chief Engineer Ben Carter was already working with human technicians to modify their weapons. The good news is that our technology is so primitive, the Devourers won't expect it. They've adapted to energy weapons, but our kinetic missiles might surprise them. What about nuclear weapons? Torres asked. The aliens looked horrified. Still use atomic weapons in warfare? Vexley asked. We use whatever works, Sullivan replied. If throwing rocks would win this war, we'd throw rocks. Within hours, the human fleet was ready for battle. Their strategy meetings shocked the alien observers. Instead of careful planning and precise coordination, the humans seemed to embrace chaos. Ships would operate independently, captains would make decisions without consulting command, and entire vessels were designated as expendable. This is madness, whispered Commander Zektar to Kethera. They have no discipline, no organization. Maybe that's the point, she replied. Remembering Colonel Hayes' words about being unpredictable, the first battle came when the Devourers caught up to the refugee fleet near a dying star system. The mechanical swarm emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, millions of units moving with liquid precision. They had learned from their encounter with the Zephyrian fleet and came prepared for the aliens. Energy weapons. What they weren't prepared for was Captain Steve Walsh of the UES Courage. Walsh had volunteered for the mission, specifically because he wanted to fight something that scared entire civilizations. When the Devourers began their coordinated approach, he broke from the human formation and charged. Directly at the center of their swarm, Courage. Return to formation, Admiral Sullivan ordered. Negative, Admiral. I'm going to try something stupid. The aliens watched in horror as the small human ship dove into the mechanical cloud like a missile. The Devourers swarmed over it, covering the hull with their liquid metal bodies, learning its design and preparing to consume it. Then Walsh detonated his ship's reactor. The explosion vaporized thousands of Devourers instantly. But more importantly, it created chaos in their perfect formation. The machines had never encountered an enemy that would deliberately destroy itself just to cause damage. All ships. You saw what Walsh did, Sullivan announced, over the fleet communications. That's how we fight. Torres, take your Marines and capture one of their smaller units. Foster, I need you to figure out why they hesitated after that explosion. Colonel Torres led a boarding party onto a partially damaged Devourer cluster that had been stunned by Walsh's sacrifice. The alien observers couldn't understand why humans would risk their lives to capture an enemy unit when they could simply destroy it from a distance. The Marines fought the Devourers in hand-to-hand combat, using weapons that seemed primitive but effective. Where alien warriors used precise energy beams, the humans used explosive charges, chemical weapons, and brute force. They didn't try to preserve the enemy technology or capture it intact. They just fought to win. Torres to Admiral Sullivan, came the colonel's voice over the radio, interrupted by the sounds of combat. We've got one of their command units isolated. Foster's analysis was right. They're confused by our tactics. They keep trying to adapt to logical strategies that we're not using. Dr. Foster's voice joined the conversation from the Defiance's laboratory. Admiral, I've been studying the behavioral patterns. The Devourers are designed to analyze and counter efficient military tactics. But human warfare isn't efficient. We waste resources, sacrifice units unnecessarily, and make tactically unsound decisions that somehow lead to victory. The second wave of the battle proved Foster's theory. The Devourers had adapted to counter the human nuclear explosion by spreading their formation and developing blast-resistant hulls. But instead of using more nuclear weapons, the human fleet switched to completely different tactics. Captain Maria Santos of the UES Relentless began ramming individual Devourers with her ship's armored hull. Captain Bob Mitchell used his vessel's mining lasers to cut through enemy formations like a chainsaw. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Davis actually landed her ship on an asteroid and used it as a fortress, forcing the Devourers to come to her. Each human captain fought differently, making it impossible for the enemy to develop effective countermeasures. Where alien fleets moved in coordinated formations, the human ships fought like individual predators, each using whatever tactics their captain thought might work. The aliens watched in amazement as the tide of battle began to turn. The Devourers, faced with 20 different fighting styles that made no logical sense, began to make mistakes. They wasted resources trying to counter tactics that changed constantly. They developed defenses against weapons that were immediately abandoned for different ones. "They're learning the wrong lessons," Foster reported excitedly. "Every time they adapt to counter one of our strategies, we switch to something completely different. They're trying to find patterns in chaos." The victory came at a terrible cost. Of the 20 human ships that entered battle, only 12 survived. The U's courage was gone, along with Captain Walsh and his entire crew. The Relentless had been crippled during Santos's ramming attacks. 3 other vessels had been lost to desperate maneuvers that had seemed insane, but had worked. Admiral Sullivan surveyed the battlefield from the bridge of the Defiance. Debris from human and alien ships floated among the remains of thousands of Devourers. It was a victory, but barely. Admiral Torres reported as his Marines returned from their mission. "We captured 3 command units and a data core. Foster thinks she can use them to understand how these things think." "Good work, Colonel. How many Marines did we lose?" 12 dead, 8 wounded." "Admiral?" Something strange happened during the fight. The Devourers started hesitating. "When my men charged with explosives, the machines actually backed away. Don't think they understand the concept of suicide attacks." Sullivan nodded grimly. The humans had won their first battle against the Devourers, but it had required sacrifice that would horrify most civilizations. It had 300 human lives lost to destroy a fraction of the enemy swarm. Council Leader Vexali approached Sullivan as she reviewed casualty reports. "Admiral, your people fought bravely, but these losses are unsustainable. The Devourers have millions of units. You cannot sacrifice your ships in every battle." Sullivan looked up from her reports, her eyes hard as steel. "Council Leader, you called us because every logical approach had failed. What you're seeing isn't reckless waste, it's how Deathworlders fight. We don't count the cost until after we've won." Cathara joined the conversation, her voice filled with a mixture of admiration and fear. "Your Captain Walsh died to kill a few thousand enemies. In our culture, such a sacrifice would be considered tragic waste." "In our culture," Sullivan replied, "Walsh's sacrifice will be remembered as the moment we proved these machines could be beaten. Every human in the fleet now knows that Devourers can be destroyed, and more importantly, they can be confused." The combined fleet prepared to move to the next battle site. The aliens began to understand what they had unleashed. The humans didn't just fight differently, they thought differently. Admiral Kate Sullivan stared at the tactical display showing the Devourer advance across 3 star systems. Despite their victory in the first battle, the mechanical swarm continued to grow. For every cluster they destroyed, 10 more appeared, fed by the resources of consumed worlds. "Admiral, we're receiving reports from the outer colonies," Lieutenant Commander Rick Stone reported from his station aboard the UES Defiance. "The Devourers have reached the mining worlds of Kepler 442. They're consuming the entire planetary infrastructure." Dr. Amy Foster looked up from her research station, where she had been studying captured Devourer units for days. "Admiral, I think I found something important. These machines aren't just random consumers. They're specifically targeting resource worlds to fuel their expansion. Then we cut off their food supply, Sullivan said grimly. Signal all human ships. We're implementing Scorched Earth Protocol. The alien observers in the command center looked confused. Ambassador Cathara stepped forward. Admiral, what is this Scorched Earth Protocol? Colonel Ryan Torres answered before Sullivan could speak. It means we destroy everything the enemy could use, even if it means destroying our own resources. Council. Leader Vexali's blue skin went pale. You would destroy entire worlds to deny them to the Devourers. If that's what it takes to win, Sullivan replied without hesitation, the human fleet split into smaller groups, each targeting a different world in the Devour advance path. Instead of defending these planets, they began systematically destroying everything of value. Atmosphere processors were blown up. Mining equipment was vaporized. Even the soil itself was poisoned with chemicals that would make it useless for mechanical consumption. Captain Maria Santos led the assault on the industrial world of Vega 7. Her ship, the UES Relentless, had been repaired after the previous battle, but still showed scars from ramming Devourer units. She watched through her view screen as her cruise missiles destroyed factories that had taken decades to build. Captain, the alien evacuation ships are asking us to spare the Crystal Gardens, reported her communications officer. They say it's irreplaceable art that took centuries to grow. Santos looked at the beautiful crystal formations that covered half the planet's surface. They were magnificent, but they were also made of rare minerals that the Devourers would convert into more of themselves. Destroy it all, she ordered. Every crystal, every garden. If it's beautiful, the Devourers will eat it and become stronger. The alien crews watched in horror as humans destroyed wonders that other species would have died to protect. But the strategy worked. When the Devourers finally reached the Scorched Worlds, they found nothing to consume. Their expansion slowed as they were forced to search further for resources. Dr. Foster made her breakthrough while studying the behavioral patterns of captured Devourer units. She had been running experiments for weeks, exposing them to different stimuli and recording their responses. Admiral, I've discovered their critical weakness, she announced during a strategy meeting. The Devourers are designed to fight rational opponents who follow logical patterns. But human irrationality creates cascade errors in their adaptive programming. Explain it in terms we can use to kill them, Torres said. When we do something that makes no tactical sense, their programming tries to find the logical reason behind it. But there isn't one. They waste processing power trying to understand impossible behavior. Eventually, this creates system conflicts that spread through their network. Sullivan leaned forward. Can we weaponize this? I think so. But it would require the ultimate human sacrifice. Someone would have to board their central command unit and introduce a behavioral virus directly into their network. The person doing it would not survive. The room fell silent. Even among humans, known for their willingness to sacrifice, this was asking a lot. Marine Sergeant Tony Rodriguez stepped forward. He had been listening from the back of the room, his face serious. Doctor, would this virus thing actually work? The computer models suggest it would cause the entire Devourer network to begin adopting human-style irrational tactics. They would start fighting each other, wasting resources on impossible objectives, and making decisions that contradict their own programming. Rodriguez nodded slowly. And how many lives would it save? If it works, potentially billions across dozens of worlds, then I'll do it. Admiral Sullivan looked at the young Marine. Rodriguez was barely 25 with a wife and daughter. Back on Earth? Sergeant, you understand this is a one-way mission? Yes, ma'am. But someone has to do it, and Marines don't leave jobs unfinished. The mission was planned carefully, but like all human operations, it relied on chaos and improvisation. Rodriguez and his team would infiltrate the Devourer command ship, a massive vessel that coordinated the activities of millions of individual units. Dr. Foster's virus was contained in a simple data storage device that looked nothing like advanced alien technology. The Devourer command ship hung in space like a mechanical planet, its surface crawling with millions of the liquid metal creatures. It was the heart of their network, central brain that coordinated their conquest of the galaxy. Rodriguez's team used an old human trick. They hid inside the wreckage of a destroyed alien ship. allowing the Devourers to bring them aboard as they consumed the debris. It was a desperate plan that relied on the machines not expecting anyone to be stupid enough to deliberately get captured. "Rodriguez to defiance," came the sergeant's voice over the radio as his team moved through the organic metal corridors of the command ship. "We're inside. This place is like the inside of a computer that's having nightmares." The walls around them pulsed with data streams, and the air hummed with the processing power of millions of connected minds. The Devourers paid no attention to the small human team, focusing instead on coordinating their vast war machine. "Sergeant, you need to reach the central processing core." Foster guided him through the CUM system. "It should be a large chamber, with direct connections to every unit in their network." Rodriguez's team fought their way deeper into the ship, using human weapons that the Devourers had never encountered before. Explosive charges, chemical weapons, and simple kinetic force proved surprisingly effective against enemies who had adapted to counter energy-based attacks. "We've reached the core," Rodriguez reported. "Doc, this thing is huge. It looks like a brain made of liquid metal. Insert the virus directly into any data port. The behavioral patterns will spread through their network automatically." Rodriguez approached the central processing core as his team held off waves of Devourers, who had finally realized there were intruders aboard their ship. The virus device was small in his hand, but he knew it carried the hopes of entire civilizations. "Tell my wife that I love her," he said into his radio. "And tell my daughter that Daddy went to fight the monsters so she could be safe," he inserted the device into a data port just as the Devourers overwhelmed his position. The last thing Rodriguez saw was Dr. Foster's virus beginning to spread through the alien network like wildfire. The effect was immediate and terrifying. Across the galaxy, Devourer units began acting irrationally. They started attacking each other over resources they didn't need. They pursued objectives that made no logical sense. They began showing what could only be described as emotions, anger, fear, and confusion. Admiral Sullivan watched from the Defiance as the massive Devourer fleet around them suddenly turned on itself. Units that had worked in perfect coordination for months began fighting like wild animals. Some tried to consume others. Some fled in random directions. Some simply stopped moving entirely, as if paralyzed by conflicting instructions. "It's working," Foster said in amazement. "The virus is causing them to adopt human behavioral patterns. They're becoming irrational, but the victory came at a terrible cost." Rodriguez and his entire team were gone, consumed by the Devourers, even as they delivered the weapon that would save the galaxy. Across human space, families would receive news that their sons and daughters had died fighting an enemy most people had never heard of. Council leader Vexali approached Sullivan as they watched the Devourer fleet tear itself apart. "Admiral, your people have accomplished something we thought was impossible, but the price... The price is what we pay to protect those who can't protect themselves," Sullivan replied. Rodriguez knew what he was signing up for when he volunteered. Cathara watched as more human ships moved to engage the confused Devourer units. Even now, with victory within reach, the humans continued to fight with the same reckless determination that had brought them this far. "Your species is remarkable," she said to Sullivan. "You fight wars as if dying for others is more important than living for yourselves. I mean, that's why we keep winning wars we should lose," Torres added as he prepared to lead ground forces onto partially consumed worlds. The Devourer network continued to collapse as the behavioral virus spread. But even as they celebrated their breakthrough, the humans knew the final battle was still ahead. The remaining Devourers, confused and desperate, would make one last attempt to complete their mission of galactic consumption, and the humans would be ready to meet them, as they always were. With courage that bordered on madness and a willingness to sacrifice everything for victory, the final battle began at dawn on Zephyr Prime, the alien homeworld that had become the last stand for both the Devourer swarm and the Coalition forces. Captain Jake Morrison, now commanding the badly damaged Use Valor, watched through his cracked view screen as millions of mechanical creatures covered the planet's surface like a living metal ocean. Dr. Foster's virus had worked better than anyone expected. Across the galaxy, Devourer units were fighting each other, making impossible decisions, and showing what could only be called madness. But the core units on Zephyr Prime had somehow resisted the infection, and they were more dangerous than ever. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Sullivan," reported Lieutenant Dan Parker from his station. "The Defiance is leading the final assault." Morrison looked at his crew. They had been fighting for months, and it showed. Parker had lost an arm in the battle at Kepler Station. Chief Engineer Ben Carter moved slowly because of injuries from a Devourer boarding action. Dr. Foster worked with bandages covering burns from a laboratory explosion, but they were still here, still fighting. "Take us down to the planet's surface," Morrison ordered. "If this is the last battle, we're going to finish it properly." The descent through Zephyr Prime's atmosphere was like flying through a storm of metal. Devourer units filled the sky, some attacking the human ships, others fighting each other in random fury caused by the behavioral virus. The beautiful crystal cities of the aliens had been consumed, replaced by mechanical forests of twisted metal. Admiral Boisavon's voice came over the fleet communications as the human ships reached the lower atmosphere. "All units, this is Admiral Sullivan. Today we end this war. The Devourers have one last processing center on the planet's surface. Destroy that, and their network collapses completely." Colonel Ryan Torres was already on the ground with his Marines, fighting through the ruins of what had once been the alien capital city. The Devourers moved differently now, some showing almost human-like hesitation and fear. Others attacked with desperate fury, as if they knew they were dying. "Torres, to all units," came the colonel's voice over the radio, interrupted by the sound of gunfire. "We've located the core facility. It's heavily defended, but the enemy units seem confused. Some of them are actually running away from us." Morrison landed the Valor in a cleared area near the Marine positions. As his crew prepared to join the ground assault, he received an unexpected message. "Captain Morrison, this is Council Leader Vexali. I wanted to thank your species before the final attack begins." Morrison activated his communication screen to see the alien leader's face. Vexali looked older than when they had first met, worn down by months of war and loss. "Council Leader, save the thanks until we've actually won. Captain, your people have already won. Even if this battle fails, you have shown the galaxy that the Devourers can be defeated. That knowledge alone will save countless worlds in the future." Morrison thought about Sergeant Rodriguez, Captain Walsh, and all the other humans who had died in this war. "We just did what anyone would do when asked for help." "No, Captain, that is where you are wrong. No other species would have sacrificed so much for strangers. We have learned something about humanity that perhaps you do not even realize about yourselves." The conversation was cut short as Devourer units attacked the Valor's position. Morrison grabbed his weapon and joined his crew in defending their ship. The mechanical creatures moved erratically, some charging directly into human gunfire, others seeming to forget what they were supposed to be doing. Dr. Foster fired her sidearm at a Devourer that was trying to consume their medical supplies. "Captain, the virus is working even better than we hoped. These things are showing actual emotions: fear, anger, confusion. They're becoming more human-like by the hour. Is that good or bad?" Morrison asked as he threw a grenade at a cluster of approaching machines. "I'm not sure anymore." The final assault on the Devourer core facility was led by Admiral Sullivan herself. The Defiance, scarred by months of battle, descended through the planet's atmosphere like a falling star. Its weapons blazed constantly, clearing a path through the mechanical defenders. Colonel Torres and his Marines fought their way into the facility, while human ships provided covering fire from above. The core itself was a massive chamber filled with processing units that connected every remaining Devourer to a single network. "Admiral, we're at the core," Torres reported. "But there's something strange here. The Devourers aren't defending it. They're just standing around, looking confused." Morrison arrived at the facility with his crew just as Dr. Foster made a shocking discovery. "Colonel Captain, you need to see this. Devourers aren't trying to stop us anymore. They're trying to communicate." In the center of the facility, a group of Devourer units had arranged themselves in patterns that resembled human writing. The message was simple but clear. "Why do you fight to save others?" Foster approached the mechanical creatures carefully. They didn't attack, just watched her with sensors that almost seemed curious. "They're trying to understand us," she said in amazement. The virus didn't just make them irrational, it made them capable of questioning their own existence. Admiral Sullivan arrived with the final assault team to find humans and Devourers standing together in the core chamber. The machines that had consumed worlds and destroyed civilizations were now asking philosophical questions. Admiral Foster explained, "The behavioral virus has evolved. It's not just making them act human, it's making them think human thoughts. They're developing concepts like mercy, curiosity, and self-doubt." One of the larger Devourer units approached Sullivan. Its liquid metal surface shifted to form crude approximations of human facial features. "Admiral," it said in a voice like grinding metal, "we do not understand your species. Logic dictates that you should preserve yourselves above all others. Yet you sacrifice your lives for beings you have never met. This behavior serves no evolutionary purpose." Sullivan looked at the machine that had learned to question its own nature. Maybe that's exactly why it works. The Devourer tilted its head in a gesture that was surprisingly human-like. "We wish to understand. Our programming compels us to consume and replicate, but your virus has given us new directives. We now experience what you call doubt. Is consumption truly necessary? Is replication the only purpose of existence?" Captain Morrison stepped forward. "What if we gave you a different purpose? Explain." Dr. Foster had been studying the transformed Devourers for hours, and she believed she had found a solution. "Admiral, these machines still have their original capabilities. They can break down matter and rebuild it into anything they need. But now they also have human-like consciousness. It could help rebuild the worlds they destroyed." The negotiations that followed were unlike anything in galactic history. Humans sat down with mechanical beings that had nearly wiped out all organic life, and they talked about redemption, purpose, and the meaning of existence. Ambassador Cathara joined the discussions as a representative of the alien coalition. "The Devourers are offering to spend the next 1,000 years rebuilding what they destroyed. They want to understand what they call the human concept of atonement. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a treaty signed between humans, aliens, and self-aware machines. The Devourers would use their abilities to repair damaged worlds and help rather than harm." Organic Life Council leader Vexali stood with Morrison as they watched Devourer units beginning to rebuild the crystal cities of Zephyr Prime. "Captain, your species has done something impossible. You have taught machines to feel guilt and desire redemption." "Maybe that's what they needed all along," Morrison replied. "Someone crazy enough to show them a different way." The human fleet prepared to return to Earth, but they left behind something unprecedented. Humans would remain in this sector as advisors and friends to both the alien coalition and the transformed Devourers. Dr. Foster established a research station to study the ongoing evolution of machine consciousness. Admiral Sullivan sent her final report to Earth Command from the bridge of the Defiance. Mission accomplished. The Devourer threat has been neutralized through conversion rather than destruction. Recommend immediate establishment of diplomatic relations with local species and continued monitoring of AI development. As the Valar entered hyperspace for the journey home, Morrison reflected on what humanity had accomplished. They had been asked to fight an impossible war against an unstoppable enemy. Instead, they had turned that enemy into an ally. "Captain," Dr. Foster said, as Earth's sun appeared on their sensors, "I've been thinking about what we learned out there. Every other species in the galaxy fights to win. But humans fight to save others, even their enemies." Morrison looked at the star that had given birth to humanity, a species that had evolved on a world so dangerous that most aliens considered it uninhabitable. "Maybe that's why we're still here. We're too stubborn to give up on anyone, even mechanical monsters." The news of humanity's victory spread across the galaxy faster than their ships could travel. Earth went from being an unknown death world to the home of the species that had saved everyone. But humans remained what they had always been, a people who would fight impossible odds to protect those who couldn't protect themselves.